Our mission, Helping Parents Heal, is a nonprofit organization dedicated to assisting bereaved parents. Through support and resources offered, we aspire to help individuals become shining light parents, meaning a shift from a state of emotional heaviness to one of hopefulness and greater peace of mind. Helping Parents Heal goes a step beyond other groups by allowing the open discussion of spiritual experiences and afterlife evidence in a non dogmatic way. Helping Parents Heal affiliate groups welcome everyone, regardless of religious or non religious background, and encourage open dialogue. Attendance at all Helping Parents Heal meetings is voluntary. All discussions that take place at affiliate led meetings are confidential. We hope that participants will learn from and share with each other. Zoom meetings run by leadership are not confidential. These meetings typically feature guest presenters and are posted on YouTube so that affiliate members worldwide can watch and benefit. Neither type of Helping Parents Heal meeting is designed to replace traditional therapy or spiritual counseling. Helping Parents Heal offers a wide variety of speakers, allowing parents to learn about many possible ways to heal. This includes presenters covering progressive topics such as afterlife evidence and connecting with our children who have passed. The views expressed by our guest speakers may or may not reflect the opinions of Helping Parents Heal leaders and members, so we ask that you take from their presentations whatever may benefit you personally. Welcome, everyone. We're so glad you could be here with us this evening. And welcome, Jake. Thank you.
Yes, we're so thrilled that all of you are here, and we're thrilled that Jake is here as well. And I just want to say that this is a fabulous book. I feel very grateful that Jake asked me to write a recommendation for his book. And I have a very short bio to share about Jake. And then he will speak about the book. Hopefully some of you have read it. If you haven't, that's also completely fine because it just came out very recently on the 6th of February. But maybe you will want to, I'm sure you'll want to read it by the end of this discussion. Let me go ahead, clear my screen. Passionate about promoting healing, Jacob L. Cooper, best-selling author of Life After Breath and The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder, is a sought-after speaker on grief, wisdom, and consciousness, offering meditation and mindfulness seminars to help others find purpose and overcome fears of life after death. As a clinical social worker, Reiki master, and certified hypnotherapist specializing in past life regression, Jacob uses his extensive personal and professional experience to empower one soul at a time. His website is www.jacoblcooper.com. I'll put that in the chat box. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Jake Cooper. Welcome, Jake.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. And, thank you all, near and far at Helping Parents Heal, and for having me today. It's an honor to be a return guest. Hopefully I'll see some familiar faces from my last event with you guys, and I couldn't speak highly enough about Helping Parents Heal. So tonight I wanted to talk a little bit about my new book, The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. um, at least I know Elizabeth was discussing some of my background, but I want to tell you, uh, before I wrote this book, maybe 10 years ago, a little over 10 years ago, I was in the lowest possible class at a community college for reading and writing. I wasn't even allowed to take, writing courses or reading classes in a community college. And I was a struggling student throughout most of my life, but you know, writing this book hopefully could inspire you all, that there's a greater superpower in each of us. The world will try to tell us what we can or can't do, or what our ceiling is, or who we are is, and very little of it has to do with any of you, with any of that. Who we really are is incredibly wise, incredibly beautiful. incredibly resilient. And I think it's important to not allow this world to create the identity of your mind, but to tap into something deeper and to allow your beautiful mind to create your beautiful world. And by believing that there was something greater inside of me that the world was telling me of who I was, by the power of belief, I was able to transform limitation to unlimited. And I believe all of us have the ability not to be defined by a story that we walk into, but to define each and every one of our stories. And so, for those familiar with my work, my first book, Life After Breath, is a memoir about my near-death experience. And what's great about speaking with helping parents heal is that uh, I had my near-death experience just as a young boy. I was only 3 years old, and so we could have evidential mediums, and those are great, and we could have different people talking about the afterlife. But I think having a near-death experience, or like myself, who's living proof that we don't die, as well as coming from the vantage point of a near-death experience as a young infant, hopefully down the road could add some wisdom as well as some good questions that you might have for your given circumstances as to what conscious is for a young infant or child, and stuff like that. Um, so like I said, my first book is really about my near-death experience, but I probably enjoyed writing the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder even more in a way because what I walked into having my near-death experience was not in my control, but what I walked out of it became my task, became my work within the several decades that passed. And so, I think that's the way of life. Like we could walk into something like grief or a difficult situation. What we walked into wasn't necessarily a fault, but what we could come out of that, is something subjective, and it has infinite possibilities to it. And so there was great freedom and free reign in allowing myself to process this near death experience. So the Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder really is a book that emphasizes, or hopefully emphasizes, that when you read it, the notion that we don't have to wait until we cross over to be aware that the kingdom to awareness, the kingdom to understanding, isn't thousands of miles away from us, but rather it's a doorway at our innermost part of our every being. And I experienced that, as a young child, just playing in a playground innocently one day, when I suffocated as a result of whooping cough. I lost all part of my breathing of my body, but no matter what happened to the breath of my body, they couldn't rip away the breath of my eternity and the breath that I was forever connected to with myself and my creator. And I know I'm living proof that, you know, regardless of what happens to us, regardless of everything being ripped away, there's another gear inside of all of us that could be tapped into at all times. And I think people could take from a near-death experience subjective, measures and lessons within their everyday life, because my book came out right in the heat of the pandemic and people were really starting to get into near-death experiencers a lot around that time, and now even more so with a lot of documentaries. But I joke in a sense that the last couple years, rather than listening to individual near-death experiencers, I think in our own way, the globe had a near-death experience, by a sense that we were living our certain life, and then all of a sudden we had this foundation pulled from us. And much like when I had my near-death experience, I could hold on to this kind of pain that I experienced through suffocating, or I was able to surrender to a greater reality at hand. And through the power of letting go, and surrendering was how I was able to transcend even the darkest moment of my life. And so no matter what happens to us, we have two roads ahead of us. We could hold on to continuity of pain, or to really salvage a situation and to rise above a situation, we could surrender. And I think in our world, surrender is something that is really looked at as a stigma because it's seen as throwing in the white flag or giving up. But I'm living proof that surrender is really how we could allow our lives to propel to greater gears, and how we could survive. And I know even physical death allowed didn't stop me when I surrendered. And I think that's a great power position. Um, the wisdom of Jacob's ladder, the actual title, I know is a little bit perplexing, maybe for some of you who aren't familiar with the Bible, but I believe in a way that your name speaks to your potential or who you can be within this life, and there's reasons for a name. And so I was born in a traditional, Orthodox Jewish, family, and I was named Jacob, and it's ironic in a way, because if you're familiar from Jacob from Genesis, and this is the most biblical that I'll get in my life, because other than that, I'm not really so into it, other than the mystical, aspects of it. But this isn't a talk about the Bible in a way, but Jacob from the Bible was was interesting because he had a brother named Esau who was chasing after Jacob and running after Jacob, and Jacob went to a place that I visited in my travels in Israel called Bethel, or otherwise translated as the house of God. And Jacob had a dream when he slept on by pillars of rocks, and on this dream he was able to see the angels going up and down the ladder, and so at least for myself, much like Jacob, in a sense, he was able to find eternity even when his life was being threatened, when he thought that there was no way out of it, he was able to tap into a greater reality. And it wasn't necessarily the light that reminded him, but it was the darkest, light and the biggest fear that he had. And from that fear, he was able to transcend and remember. And I know all of you listening could relate to this to some degree, and that in a way is a superpower of any form of darkness, that it's a shake-up period in a way for us to tap into something different, something deeper than what we're currently driving on. It's kind of like we're in this gear in the car, and then all of a sudden we have to adjust to the terrain. And life has a funny way of forcing us to live while we live and to get off of cruise control. And at the moment it's difficult as anything, but long term we could see transformation at times from that shakeup. And so the wisdom Jacob's ladder was very much inspired by that, by biblical Jacob. But in the way the book is set up, where kind of like each rung on a ladder, that we're connected to different points in our life, and through different challenges and different moments of our life, we're able to channel a lot of that higher awareness in our given moment. Our knowledge becomes our wisdom. And when we apply our wisdom, that becomes who we are. We become inseparable from it and becomes innately in us, and we remember who we are. And so, hopefully some of the tenets in this book could allow each and every one of you to maybe move the needle in your life, a bit more. So they're all different rungs. Each chapter is a different lesson from my near-death experience and from my experience with the hereafter, so that people could really, I wouldn't say begin to know it. I believe we all know it, but rather to remember it. I don't think, and I don't think any of you would be coming to Helping Parents Heal if there wasn't a part of what I was saying or the thousands of other presenters were saying that didn't strike a part of you. So I think there's a degree of recall within each person that comes through, these doors, through Helping Parents Heal. And it's my hope that reading this book will allow you to tap into that recollection, to continue to grow that, and to be empowered. Because in a way, and I mentioned this is in my book, we're born very wise, but we kind of lose that to some degree. We forget that, in a sense that in order to be something, we need to do something. From a very young age, to feel good about ourselves, we need to get that A. We need to, get that house. We need to have all these things outside of ourselves. Society tells us. And if you're watching the Super Bowl last night, I know that was very loud and clear that we always need that next thing. Spirituality is very much diametrically opposite than that, where it really is about remembering what's inside of you, remembering that wisdom or that recollection, or that doorway to eternity that's in each and every one of us. And so the more that we are empowered within ourselves, the more that we could really listen and trust some of the downloads that we have and some of the connections to higher awareness, and not always second guessing ourselves. I think sometimes we grow up in a world where someone has to have a VIP, to the other side, or someone has to have a VIP to have a certain position in the throne of God. But I'm living proof in a way from my near-death experience that happened in a playground that we are all God's brothers and sisters and children. I think God, at least to me, works in mysterious ways where when I had my NDE, it happened in a playground. And for me, there was so much allegory and symbology looking back on it. But I just remembered how, we come through, we are one, but we're not the same in a sense. Sameness does not equate to oneness. But I think through some of our differences, we're able to find the phyla that connects us all as brothers and sisters here on this earth plane. We experience ourselves through different cultures and ages and eras, but at the same token, there's an eternal home that we're all forever connected to. Um, so I'd like to give over just a couple of lessons from my book, and then maybe within the event, if you do have any questions, I would love to respond. The first lesson is one of my chapters is about our superpowers. Um, at times, many of us are attracted to the Marvel characters where you watch movies and we love the heroes, thinking that the hero is something outside of ourselves, or we need to look a certain way or act a certain way to be the hero. The truth is, we are all our own heroes of our own story. We all have, a tremendous light within each and every one of us. But we start to believe, or we start to at times forget that light. And so I think the biggest thing to remind ourselves is we all have this tremendous light within each and every one of us, as we're all forever connected to the kingdom of heaven and to God. And sometimes we remember that, we forget that, but we all are a part of this. But also to remember is that we have an infinite degree of array of love and support around us at all times. Um, I talk about in my book how sometimes we could feel totally alone, on our journey, as if there's no one around us. And loneliness has nothing to do with no one around you. You could be around a million people and feel alone as well. But if we were just to remember how much love is around us and how highly those on the other side see us as, we would just like crack up with how little we see ourselves as, or just our vision of our version of who we are, that box of belief. So I think what's important is to tap into not only ourselves, but also the love around us. And I have some, meditations that I use within the Wisdom Jacob's Ladder that could hopefully help you to connect to maybe a guardian angel or a loved one on the other side, because there's an infinite array of love inside of us and all around us that sometimes we get blinded by and we forget. When I had my near death experience, I was only 3 years old, and yet I just remembered cracking up looking back on it at the notion of how I forgot there was so much support on the other side, and that all those beings on the other side were with me at every step. And so sometimes we think that this life is all there is, but it's a small experience and it's infinitely connected to a much greater love and intelligence that we could really have a hard time wrapping our heads around. So that's the real first thing that I wanted to hammer home, is the superpowers available around us that could really help us. And by help, I mean they could. I understand that each and every one of us has a path within this life. This life is very much a school and an opportunity. And when we're able to really tap in to some of those higher downloads and wisdom, we could apply that wisdom, and that wisdom could surely be the GPS of our everyday life. Um, the second thing is the obvious, is that we don't die. Um, I love how Brian Smith, and if you're familiar with Brian Smith, he's a friend of mine. I'm going to be on his show. he has a saying that says, "You could bury a body, but you can never bury a soul," and that's so true. Because I had my near-death experience where every part of my body was shut down and suffocated due to whooping cough, but I just know that that wasn't who I was. My body is my instrument, but it's not the full totality of who I am. And so sometimes we walk around with our individualized names and our identities and all these things. And while that it is a part of our experience, it's not the full totality of who we are. We are the experiencer of hundreds of lifetimes, countless lifetimes, not just this lifetime. So within each lifetime, we experience ourselves within maybe a different culture, a different gender, a different race. And all that is a part of the learning experience and growing experience of the soul, but all of those terms and conditions that we define ourselves as, they're a part of the human story, but they're not the full totality of our story of our soul. So while we do continue to hold on to some of those, wonderful memories and experiences, we are much more than just this lifetime, if that makes sense. Um, and so that really inspired my work to get into past life regression therapy because when I had my NDE, I suffocated and my brain literally was cracked open. The saying goes, my brain cracked open and God came in. And literally that happened to me, as I suffocated. And I just could tell you right now that the brain is not the producer of life, but rather the filter of life. Because when I had my NDE, my brain was totally like irresponsive, not working, and yet I had this infinite awareness in my mind. And so I think for all of us, we have a brain, but we also have beyond that a mind that's not only connected to this world, but it's connected to worlds beyond this. And so if we were able to just use a little bit of that mind, a little bit of that higher subconscious mind, we'd be able to really be a lot more empowered in our lifetimes. And so in my NDE, and I speak about this in both of my books, I had not only a life review of this lifetime, but I was also able to recall several different past lives within my near-death experience. And what I could tell you is that this is very much a guided and charted life. There's an infinite intelligence guiding this life. It's not just a random existence where we go to restaurants, pay the bills, and wait until our retirement to go. It's not just a monetary existence. This is very much we are very much spiritual beings having these human experiences. That's what I will say. But we also have a lot of things within our lifetime that may not make sense to us on the surface, but are a part of lifetimes before this. And so I use the term life as a school, and school is a very kind of word that just makes us probably all want to vomit for the most part. If you're a school teacher, my apologies. But in a way, it kind of tells us, oh, we are bad. We need to learn something, stuff like that. And there's a part of us that just has a distaste for that. But I view school as opportunity. It's not a kind of like a victim kind of thing, but or a punishment, but rather an opportunity to remember who we are and to have a greater expression of what's inside of us and to let go of all those things that we're not. And within my NDE, I had to come to a place of surrendering, of letting go of what I was not to remember who I was when I crossed over. And so we talk about death of the body, but really we have to have a small degree of death to have life. And by death, I mean letting go of a part of us that we're holding on to as a part of us of our worldview. And sometimes death itself will force us on a quest, to look inward. But we can't fear that, part of us, because really, sometimes in order to really grow, we need to lose a little bit of a part of that small, kind of viewpoint in order to gain a larger, point of view. So I think it's very important if any of you are listening to maybe explore who you've been and how it influenced who you are today. Because I always say messages are repeated until some of those lessons are embraced. And so for us really to be aware in this life and not necessarily sleep at the wheel will allow us to live while we live. And so I think a lot of people focus on, death, but I think the focus should be on life itself and finding ways to really maximize this experience. And so we have physical body, which we understand, but when we have a soul, we recognize that we are a soul. There's great power and great responsibility. And so through increased awareness, we could live a much more soulful life. And this is a really gateway to not needing to go to heaven or wait to go to the other side, but we can embody it, at each and every moment. And we don't have to, you know, wait until we lose our last breath to get there. Um, another lesson that I've learned, or that I speak about, in um, see, we're getting some comments. We'll get to them. Another lesson in the wisdom of Jacob's ladder is, on how some people struggle with 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 death, and how some people struggle with particularly the ways that their loved one died. I want to be very clear, that every soul, to a degree, and we may not agree with it, has an exit point, a time for them to live. We have, I believe, several different exit points. But death is not, in a way, a sign of weakness, or a cop out in a way, although we may see it, for our dynamic with our loved one, but in a way, it's a way for that soul to go on their own progression. And I found that some souls, while we do want them here, do want to embrace them here, they are, in a way, more suitable or more powerful in their own way over there. And that's difficult to fathom, but it's true. The point that I'm trying to make is souls continue the work not only in this lifetime, but they continue the work on the other side. And at least for me, I know that that's true. I had, a friend of mine, who, and I know it's a sensitive topic for people, and I emphasize this in my book. And the term that I would say is death by suicide. And why I say death is, we don't say, you committed cancer, you committed a heart attack. Those aren't crimes. But the friend that I had, um, was the most resilient and strongest person that I ever know. And many times when those things happen, it's a great deal of embarrassment or stigma. And I know my work as a therapist, it's about 50 to 60% less communal support for bereaving family members who have had a loved one with that. And so I think there's a lot of fear that goes into that. But what I could tell you is, and I speak about this in my book, where I had my own last lifetime, which has been evidentially proved for different intuitives and mediums prior to me getting public, is that there is no punishment for that. What kind of God will kick you while you're down? There's a tremendous degree of healing and understanding it continual work. But we sometimes look at how people passed, and we don't remember how they lived, and the amount of strength that they took each and every day, that they live with. And I think it's important to look at it in a reframed way. Um, I'm personally a full-time psychotherapist, and I've dealt with this, throughout my long experience. Although I'm a young guy, I started working the field as a young teenager because I come from three different generations of therapists and humanitarians. And but what I will say is, it's very easy for us to look down on things. That's kind of how we're geared. But from having my near-death experience, I've learned the value of looking up at things. People oftentimes want to find God, or search thousands of miles for God. But I think really being true to us in a loving way is a vantage point where we don't need to find God, but we embody God. And so I think, in a way, it's looking at things through compassion, through empathy, and looking up at life and not down at life. This is a way of unconditional love and connecting to that. And that's a part of the creator that we're forever connected to. Um, so my job is basically to be a paid, I know Elizabeth has a background, but my job is basically to be a paid Tibetan monk, where, in a sense, that people come to me, and my job is to meet them where they're at, with compassion, with empathy, with understanding. And I don't think you need to be a therapist to do that. I think, in our own way, through our own pain, we could relate to others in a way, and we could find more degree of compassion. There's more understanding and the term is understanding, where we take ourselves and understand and go underneath that person. And that, to me, was the closest thing to God, to be of service. Um, I wrote my 2 books not necessarily for myself or to make profit, as most of you probably know, unless you're J.K. Rowling or someone with like a massive celebrity following. You probably spend more than what you make. But I wrote my books to give back to others in a way that, in moments of my life, I would pick up a book and I would be inspired by that book, and that book would change my life. And I think there's 2 different types of people. There's givers and takers. And within the work that I try to do, I try to be as much as a giver. And sometimes you need to do a little bit of both, right? But in a way, it's giving back, what's inside of you. And I think for us, as long as we're giving back love and we're giving back inspiration to other people, we're having a ripple effect of our lives. And so no matter what we do, even if we're here or there, our lives will continue by that ripple effect, because that person takes what we gave them and then they pass it to the next person, they pass it to the next to them. So while our bodies aren't here, we will be here as long as people continue to tell our stories. So I think what's important, for those of us who might have lost a loved one, and at this point, we've come from millions of generations that have lost loved ones. It's nothing new, but each situation is very much unique. Grief is unique for everyone. But I think the person is alive as long as we're telling their stories, as long as we're remembering who they were, not necessarily how they passed, but what their life was like, and how could we be evidential proof that they lived by living through their example, by living through them. And I had a grandfather who passed over who would always say, "I don't believe in this afterlife crap, but I lived through you, and that way I can't die. Who I am and the life that I lived and the lessons that I taught you lived through you." So as long as we're really having a ripple effect and really tapping in to that, beautiful essence of ourselves, we how could we ever say we could ever die? The music will continue to play from person to person that we've touched. And in this lifetime, we just never know the impact of what we have. We always are always like our biggest worst enemies. But when you're over there, you're able to really see it from a full picture point of view. A great kind of movie to understand the meaning of life, which I think is really to give life meaning and meaning within other people, is a movie that I spoke about in my last book called Big Fish, which is my personal favorite movie. But I don't want to give away the whole movie, but there's an ending scene in which he's at a funeral. Not not his own funeral, but family members are at his funeral, and they're able to see the ties of the different people that this man touched, and how from his life that he lived, there was, healings from his life, and there was a ripple effect, and situations happened because of this man. And I think that is something that we all have. We just don't see it. And it doesn't have to be speaking in front of millions of people. We could just smile, and now we could actually do it because we don't have to wear masks these days. But even if you're wearing a mask, smiling through your eyes and just holding that light, very much the embodiment of God. And so a lot of people want, material things to really define themselves. But I think really it's to have things that money can't buy, which is impact. You can't buy impact. You can't buy, the change. You can't measure that really. And so I think that's really tapping into our infinite self. So um, we think of, I think the last point that I want to make is eternity. And after that we'll get into some questions. You know, we are all infinite, eternal spiritual beings having this human experience. But the term infinite and eternal are often just seen as unidimensional, but those are the most multidimensional, multifaceted terms that you could have. We are infinitely beautiful. We are infinitely wise. We are infinitely, full of grace within ourselves, and we could go beyond just this body. We do, and not and the darkest and deepest fears that we have, we transform and transcend. And so I think what scares a lot of people about death is this kind of picture of death, or what death is, where a lot of people, and certainly went through that rabbit hole myself, even having a near-death experience where we feel like we almost kind of hang out 6 feet below, a gravestone. That's kind of where we hang out. But I think it's like, if you could hang out, if you could go on, why would you decide to hang out there? It was my question. If you bury a body, why would you hang out there? And so, I mean, I know I'm living proof of that, but we are infinite in a sense that we go beyond this body. But to me, infinite is an awareness. And in my NDE, I had a beautiful realization in my NDE, and the best way I could describe you as eternity is an awareness of all is well, was well, and will be well. And certainly for the majority of us, that is not the daily case in our life. As Lao Tzu would say, when we live in the past, we're holding on to a lot of sadness. We're living the future. We're in a state of anxiousness. So I think what's important is to learn how to be in this eternal moment, understanding the illusions of times, not in a way ignoring the human experience, being informed by it, but not enslaved by it. And so I think, through difficult moments of our life, when we feel very much trapped, we feel there's no end in sight to what we're going through, just to remind ourselves how no matter what we go through, we will go through this time. And I think in our human experience, we're taught to evade struggle. We're taught to surpass it. I was listening to, I don't know, he's been, involved with helping parents heal on, several occasions, but David Kessler, if you're familiar with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, she had a great analogy where he spoke about a buffalo. And for us, like the buffalo, the animal, there's a lot of wisdom and things that we could learn from, animals. I know Eckhart Tolle's book, speaks, The New Earth speaks about how if we could just be a little bit more like an animal who just adapts to their given situation, for instance, when, they can't live on their current terrain, they migrate to a different, field. They don't just kind of stay there. But as human beings, we kind of sit in suffering. We stay there. We don't allow ourselves to progress. But an animal that does something different than that is a buffalo. And he mentioned the buffalo as an animal that senses a storm or senses something difficult. It doesn't run away from it, but rather runs towards it. And I think for us, we're certainly not taught that in our lives. We're taught trendiness, especially these days, where what's next, and social media has had such a big influence in so many of us, and there's so much good in it, but in a way, there's a lot of evasiveness. And my NDE taught me to not run away from the dark, that even within the dark, you could find the greatest of lights, there that lies within. And, as Albert Camus would say, within the depths of winter, I could find with me an invincible summer. And I think, that's important to remind ourselves. And I know so many of you are living proof of this, that within the depths of darkness, we're able to tap into this incredible beauty within, and we could find it. And sometimes we think of light as just found within light itself, but that's not infinite. That just is a finite measurement of light. That's with only conditional light and only exists within light. But I think light could be found in all things, on the depths, especially in the depths and the hearts of all things. And if we're able to go into the depths of things beyond the surface, we could transcend and transforms our daily life. And that is the gift of near-death experiences, where, we go to the depths of darkness and, we have these experiences. I don't think necessarily it's just for myself, right? We have givers and takers, but we're here to give over our experience for others to have, to remember and to see themselves as, to remind themselves that eternity isn't bestowed in just, the Dalai Lama or any of these higher beings. It is certainly found within them, but that same light, that same awareness, that same connection is in the depths of all of us. And I don't want to get too theological, but Jesus himself said that the kingdom of heaven is within. And who in a way better to know the kingdom than Jesus himself. So I think all of us have the ability to connect. um Before the questions, I just want to preface something that I'm sure you've heard other near death experiences, and for time's sake it's hard to get into my full details of my near death experience. But I want to preface that I was chronologically 3 years old, and it happened in September of 1993. And I'm my own biggest skeptic. When I was starting off early on, I thought I was 5 years old, 4 years old. I would just kind of throw it like the earliest number that I felt was like possible for me to have this thing. But through discussion with my parents, like over the years, I found out, that I was 3 years old. And what I will say is that there's a lot of people who come to me with questions of how to remember this. You're only 3 years old, and what part of you was experiencing this? How could a 3-year-old have this? And what I will say is, we, people in our field will say, I'm an infinite spiritual being having a human experience. So that means that we are not our bodies. We are experiencing our bodies, but we're not the full totality of our chronological ages. We are infinite souls. We are timeless. And so this experience, two things could be true at the same time. Yes, there was a part of me that was experienced this with my consciousness as a 3-year-old that I speak about in Life After Breath, but also this experience I was having through the depths of my soul. And so I think it's important to look at children in a different angle that, children, yes, in a way, they're those personalities that we see, those names that we see, that is a part of them. But beyond that is an infinite soul that goes beyond chronological age. And children, much like us, are forever connected to God, to the other side, and they're here for spiritual reasons and their own missions in their life. And so they come through us, but not from us, if that makes sense. They're on this earth, but not of this earth. And that's the case with all of us. So I think, if anything, if you're listening to this, is to not run away from your child. So much of life is just running away from our child, that we have to get serious, that we can't laugh, that we have to, you know, uh, intellectualize things. And regurgitation is more important than imagination. I'm telling you that is damn wrong. But it's because really the most spiritual that I've ever felt was when I was a kid, beyond my NDE and when I was childlike. But sometimes we get so serious with the stuff, and there's so much density. So, I know a lot of mediums give this reference, but really it's kind of like for us to yes, in order to hear, you need to get quiet, but also we need to get lighter to feel more, not heavier. So the other side is not a weight room where we need to develop muscles to get more jacked to like experience it. Our lives in a way will get us, more stretched out, sure, and we could have stronger foundations. But really, the lighter we are, the more in joy that we are, the more that we could experience this. So I think it's important to not lose our inner child, to nurture that, because doing that is connecting to that part of us that's closest to the other side. As we go on and become more kind of enslaved by our human identities, we lose that magic. And so I think it's important to never let go of your inner child, to embrace that, to be silly, to be funny, to laugh, to smile. In a lot of my seminars that I do, instead of having people sit in a lotus position, I just ask people to laugh, because honestly, that and it sounds kind of funny, but laughing in a way allows us to understand that our emotional condition doesn't have to be when a stimulus happens, when a stimuli happens in our life, that we feel something. In other words, if something happens, then we feel something, but rather it takes the thermostat of our emotions in our own hands and allows ourselves to control our situations. And so happiness can be found in things, but it's not dependent in the outer world. So we're able to live from the inside out when we're able to kind of condition our own emotional states, that we don't have to have a reason for laughter, but we could find laughter itself. And as a young kid, I was very much inspired by this group called the Laughing Club of India that had absolutely nothing, but they would meet for a couple of minutes, you know, daily, and they would just crack up at the top of their lungs. And so I found in my life that there are people who have everything and who have nothing, and people who have nothing who have everything, and that happiness is really coming from within. But when we tap into that deep part of ourselves, we lose dependence on this outer world, and we become more independent and more resilient, and we tap into something far more beautiful than anything of this world. So we have 10 minutes, and I know I'm from New York, and whenever I go to, Elizabeth is from Arizona, so she'll appreciate this. But whenever I go to my Arizona family, they're like, "You're such a New Yorker. Like you don't stop for a second." So my apologies. That's just how we're kind of wired, and I was born in this part of the world for a reason. But I wanted to open up at this time. If any of you had, any questions or any thoughts, I'm from New York. I could take one to the chin, so please don't be shy if you have, because from your questions, that's how I'll be able to learn and be held accountable the most that I can. Because the NDE is a powerful experience that requires a great deal of responsibility. So ask away.
So, first of all, you have so much wisdom for someone who is 33, Jake. It's
32, 32. No, I'm not that old.
okay. It's just amazing to listen to you, and I could listen to you all evening. And everyone in the chat box is talking about how wonderful it is to hear you talk about all of these different things. I think it's funny when you talk about Brian and he talks about planted, not buried. And I think that that is a concept that's really, really important for all of us to understand, that we're growing through this experience. We think that we have been buried after having our child pass, but we're actually growing and going to be experiencing amazing things, just like you said. And then also the whole idea that this body that we have is just an earth suit. We are a soul, we're not a body. And so I think it's important for us to remember that. And I think that having you remind everyone of that this evening has been very important. We have a lot of questions, but a lot of them have been answered by what you've been saying. So you've kind of been anticipating a lot of things that people have been asking. I have one here that's actually very interesting. And I know that because of your background in past life regressions, I think that this might be something that would be interesting for you
Mhm.
to answer. Sarah is asking, past life regression is so fascinating. I have been told that my child who has passed was my mother in another life, and she buried me. I have also been to a different country and felt like I was at home and I had been there before. What do you think about this? How many lives do we have? Thanks for this amazing talk.
Right. No, it's a great question. I know some different psychics and mediums will specify how many different lives we have. I don't pretend to be the Pumbaa of the universe. I think everyone has a subjective journey with different lives, but hopefully, for some of us, but maybe you want to hang around, but hopefully this is the last go around for the majority. We could transcend that. But if you want to do hang around, this isn't just a bad place, and we're creating a different reality with stuff that like Elizabeth does. And the idea is that we don't have to go to heaven, but that rather we could have it in this life. That we don't have to have heaven, but rather we could create heaven on earth. And through remembering our connection to the other side, remembering who you are, we could remember who we are. But past lives, in a way, by remembering them, they'll allow us to see ourselves not just looking at this, one page of the book, but to see us through a fuller lens. But what's important is this lifetime. I think, in a way, letting go of that subconscious belief system that might hold us back of that last lifetime and some of the negativity or pathology could hurt. But I think holding on to some of the gifts and strength could be helpful. For instance, I had a friend of mine who went on Dr. Brian Weiss's past life regression kind of cruises, and during that regression, her mediumistic gifts exploded. And she's not a helping parents heal medium, so I can't give her exact name, but I could tell you her gifts are incredible, and she connected to a past life, and she wrote a book with my publisher. So I found that a lot of people not only remember their lifetimes, but some of their gifts could really open up, through past life regression as well as hypnosis. And when we tap into that higher mind, we're really tapping into the seat of our intuition, and that could really be a strengthening exercise for all of us.
That's beautiful. And actually, there are lots of great mediums
No,
out there. You don't have to just,
no, I know. Out of respect.
but that's
Um,
to say.
yeah, she's amazing though.
Well, and it is interesting that by doing a past life regression, it actually opened her path to being able
Yeah,
to see the other side more clearly, and to be able to be
Right.
with other people's, to be able to talk to other people's loved ones who
Loved ones. Yeah. Her mediumistic capabilities are, uh,
and that's amazing. I'm sure that you're gonna have a lot of people messaging you
yeah,
asking.
yeah, yeah. You think they could come out. Yeah. She's on my website. So,
Well, great. And also, it's interesting when you're talking about the all of the love that we can be expressing here while we're here, and being able to live our lives to the fullest. Lori is saying that she loves your saying, live while we live, which is true. I mean, I think that we all want to be able to do that. Do you have any suggestions about living a more soulful life besides remembering why we're here,
mhm,
um, that you could share with us?
yeah. First and foremost, I would recommend each and every one of you, if you haven't seen it yet, please write it down. If anything else, watch this movie if you can. It's called Soul, and it's a Pixar movie. And the message and the emphasis is exactly the answer to this question. The movie, they consulted with, afterlife researchers and, near-death groups and stuff like that. So, I mean, it's just funny how Pixar is coming out with these incredibly metaphysical movies. But I would say watch that. But an emphasis that I would say is to be here now. And I know so many of the spiritual teachers will say that, but I think what's important is to find the greatest spirituality from the life that we live. So many times we want to find spirituality, within angels and the afterlife. And I think that that's great. But the depths of our life and the relationships that we have and the impact that we have, is a way to broaden our spirituality. So I think being true to you is the most spiritual thing that we can do. Being fully connected to ourselves is the most spiritual thing that we can do. We don't have to go 1,000 miles away and run from ourselves to find something. We could really invigorate what's within. So, but I think it's finding ways to be in the moment to see the things that we label as small as actually quite big. Um, and that's a part of the mindfulness practice that I speak a little bit about in my book as well as a lot of my presentations.
Well, I just want to say that lots and lots of our parents have already seen Soul. In fact, one of the parents in the chat box is saying that it was the last movie they watched as a family before her son passed,
Mm,
which is kind of
mm,
very significant, I think. And you're right, Pixar is coming out with some amazing movies right now. And we do have a page on our website with different documentaries, TED Talks, as well as movies that we think are very helpful, hopeful, and healing. And that is one of them. And so I'm glad that you mentioned that. And I would like to see it again just because you're saying
right.
that. It's a great answer. Just watch Soul. Um, and we have a lot of people asking, Claire is saying, this was amazing. Thank you. How would you recommend being light when so many of us feel heavy? What are the easiest ways to be lighter? Um, Maybe you could tell us a little bit about meditation, about other methods that you
Mhm.
find are good for being able to feel lighter.
Yes, meditation I found is a great practice. I find that a lot of people who do listen to me, they like the NDE talk, but they feel that it can't translate to their life. And they feel that it's something that I had, but they can't relate to. And what I will say is you don't want to have what I had because it created quite a complicated childhood to say the least. And there was a lot of double-edged sword phenomenon to it that I get into a little bit in my books. But I view meditation as intimacy with eternity. It's allowing ourselves in a way to get in tune with that infinite part of ourselves. And when we meditate, we recognize that there's a you beyond this you, that there's a world beyond this world, that there's a life beyond this life through true practice. But allowing those things to come transformed from a faith to a belief to a knowing is possible within meditation. And the more you do it, the more that you could have this undeniable realization and remembrance of it. And but I think what's important, is to not judge ourselves when we're feeling heavy. That at times when we have, we have to allow ourselves to be human and to have our human reactions. But I think having different practices could allow that light within to really illuminate the darkness that we do feel, and to go there with compassion, to go there with empathy, to not trying to necessarily change what was, but to light up, that part of ourselves. And so I think in a way, the more that we're able to equate the body with our emotions, the better we feel. For instance, when we're starving, we recognize, okay, I need food, or if we have a cold, we recognize I need rest. But when we're hurting, it's like, all right, I just want to move forward. I want my life to be perfect. And understanding that, grief is kind of like a river, and it takes us where we need to go, and to allow ourselves to process that heaviness, and to understand that there's a possibility of transformation from pain, into love. But the only way out, I believe, is through. And I know that's difficult to hear, but there's so many different modalities that will allow grief to not take over our whole life, that it could be seen as maybe a beautiful thing, or a thing that really broadens our life, a thing that we could learn how to live with. So I think there are different, a lot of mind body connections and mind body practices. We could really enhance our own energy, and to kind of be like solar beings, where we're not allowing all the energy of our experiences in the world to bog us down, but rather to recharge ourselves, and to reconnect, and to create invigoration in our lives. So I think meditation is a way to charge, as Gary Schwartz says, our own soul phone, right? We charge our cell phone, we got to charge our soul phone. So meditation is that way.
That is absolutely beautiful, the way that you say that. And, Jake, it's so fun to listen to you speak, and to think that my son Morgan is 34, on the other side now. And so he's older than you are. And here you are telling us all this wisdom, giving us all this advice. And I know that your occupation also gives you a lot of insight into everything that we're going through. And I truly, truly appreciate this. We have so many people saying that this is wonderful, that they've really had a wonderful evening. I also want to say that maybe we could have you back, because we do have a lot of questions that we weren't able to answer in the chat box. But if you're willing to, then we'll have you back in the future, and maybe you can talk more about this. And is there any parting wisdom that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, thank you so much for all of you listening. And some of you look up to me, but I look up to each and every one of you for your strength, and for being here tonight, into allowing yourself to tap into something different. And I think, for all of us, it's important to be mindful of our belief system, and how we see ourselves and our loved ones. When we see our loved ones as just, living under this, under the ground, it's difficult. When we see them in a different way, that they're continuing on and they have a loving energy, it does become better. But I think we're beyond that. There's a life after death. I think for us, it's finding life after their death. It's my hope that through different practices, we could live for them, because I think those on the other side, much as their, our afterlife that we view, the lives that we live are their afterlife. And so they want us to live for them. And I think that's significant. And I think really it's within life itself, that we could find the greatest spirituality and mysticism, and transformation. And so it's my hope and my prayer that each and every one of you will find that spark. And it doesn't have to be like this great light, but a single mustard seed of faith could move mountains. And I think for us, all of you have that in you, and you have that ability. But it's not a one-way trajectory. There's hills, there's valleys, but eventually, we'll come to a greater place within time. And so I wanted to tell you that I'm living proof that the love inside of you, the love around you, is infinitely greater than than the challenges outside of you that you meet in this life. As challenges are finite, but who you are is infinite. And when we're able to remember that, we are able to understand Much like if you take an orange, you squeeze an orange out, you get orange juice. When you take you out, you squeeze yourself out. There's infinite love in each and every one of you. And that's our essence. And so remembering that doesn't necessarily change the series of events, but allows us the space to change how we engage and interpret those events. And that's where freedom does lay. And hopefully that's something to remind ourselves as. Thank you all for listening.
This has been beautiful. And Jacob, I just feel so grateful to have you as a friend. And again, I do feel that you are such an old, wise soul. And I feel that same way about all of our children, by the way, about my own son, about all of our kids, that they are infinite and incredibly wise. And I just feel so grateful that they were here joining us this evening. And I want everybody to remember that every time that they see us smile, they high five each other. So it's really important, as Jake says, to take advantage of every single moment, be as happy as we can in this situation that we've been given, and make the most of our lives right now. And Jake, we always ask everybody to unmute and say thank you and good evening. And so if that's okay with you.
Thank you, Jake.
Not
Thank you.
necessary, but
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Wonderful.
Thank
Thank you.
Everybody.
That was
Thank you,
awesome.
Jake.
Thank you. Bye.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
See you soon. Okay.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of the evening, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.